You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
For the community, by the community.
Hello, I'm Christine Beck, and I'm the current Poet Laureate for the town of West Hartford. Welcome to Poetry Around the Town. This is a series of monthly conversations about poetry that is available to West Hartford residents, and I'm particularly speaking with people who are very involved in organizing poetry projects, which is near and dear to my heart. So today we're actually going to be talking about a wonderful project called Poetry Out Loud. I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about that in a moment. For now, if this is the first episode of Poetry Around the Town that you are seeing, then I invite you to go to the website for West Hartford Community TV, which is whctv.org. You can click on Video on Demand and then Poetry Around the Town, and you can see the interviews that I have conducted with former Poets Laureate from the town of West Hartford and some other people who are involved in organizing poetry events that are available to our residents. So I highly recommend that, and again, thank you for tuning in and being with us to talk about poetry and the power of poetry. Why am I talking about poetry out loud? I'm going to give you a quick little summary of why it's important to me, and then I'm going to introduce a couple of guests, one of whom is a student who has participated and won in Poetry Out Loud, and another who is vitally important as one of our organizers of the program through the Connecticut Humanities. So, Poetry Out Loud is a competition available to high school students where they select, memorize, and recite 3 poems, and they are judged by a panel of judges. The winner at each school that participates goes to a statewide participation. The state winner goes on to Washington, D.C. for a national competition where there are $20,000 in grants, awards, etc. available to the winners of that competition. So it's a really big project, and it's been around for 10 years on the national front. When I judged Poetry Out Loud at the Connecticut State Finals this spring, I was thrilled to see many high schools that I had never heard of participating, and I was a bit abashed to see that we did not have a West Hartford Public High School represented. That is to say, neither Hall, you know who you are, or Conard, you also know who you are, was represented at Poetry Out Loud. This hurt my heart, folks. I really felt badly about this. I will say that we had one wonderful participant from Renbrook. I want to give him a shout out, a 9th grader. But from our public high schools, we did not have a Poetry Out Loud team that had been mounted. I want to go on record as saying that I feel passionately that we should. Hopefully we can get both Hall and Conard involved. After all, you love to duke it out on all kinds of other things. Why not poetry? And I'm personally volunteering to be a coach. So I know there's a teacher at Hall who would like to bring this to Hall in the fall. I'm hoping that, within the sound of my voice or someone out there who is listening will take this back to Conard. But I would be happy to be a mentor for any program in our West Hartford high schools that would like to take on Poetry Out Loud. It's a fabulous program. Its development of skills amongst our young poets is absolutely extraordinary, and so that's my commitment to you. If you want it, I'll be there. Now, with that said, I'd like to introduce my first guest, who is Scott Wands. He is at the Connecticut Humanities, and its website is cthumanities.org. And just ask you, Scott, to tell us a little bit about Poetry Out Loud and what your involvement is in it.
Well, thank you, Christine, first for having us here and for talking about Poetry Out Loud with your audience today. As you said, it's a high school competition where students get to learn poetry, read poetry, and improve their public speaking skills all at the same time. And fits very well with our mission at Connecticut Humanities, which is to help Connecticut citizens better understand who they are as a people and where we're going as a society. And poetry is an important part of that. Literature is an important part of that. So we were happy for the last 4 years to be working with the Connecticut Office of the Arts to run Poetry Out Loud here in Connecticut. It's a national program, as you said. Nationally, it's organized by the National Endowment for the Arts in alignment with the National Poetry Foundation. And in Connecticut, we run it, as I said, in partnership with the Office of the Arts, which is under the Department of Economic and Community Development. It's a year-long program. Students begin working with their teachers in the fall, have competitions in the spring, and you're going to be wowed and your listeners will be wowed when they hear Owen recite some poetry in a little bit here.
Now, I understand from your website that there have been over 3 million students who have gone through Poetry Out Loud nationwide in the last 10 years. That's amazing.
It's really amazing. All 50 states compete in Poetry Out Loud, as well as 2 territories, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. In Connecticut, just this past year alone, we had over 6,000 students participate at the classroom level, at the school level, statewide. We had 42 schools in all participate, and we'd love more. We'd love West Hartford, Hall, and Concord to participate with us, so we'll get you how to get in touch with us later and do that. We are able to send 1 student on nationally. Owen was our state champion 2 years ago, and Emily Saunders was our champion this year, and have just done really well representing not only us nationally, but as advocates for poetry and all things Connecticut across the state.
It really is just, again, a remarkable program. And what I'd like to do now is invite Owen, in the theory that, a picture's worth 1,000 words, or 1,000 words are worth a picture, or, wait a minute, I'm mixing up my metaphors here. Nonetheless, I want you to see Owen perform one of the poems that he has done for Poetry Out Loud, because you really have to see it to believe it. So with that, Owen, would you please give us a poem? I don't even know what one it's going to be, so that's going to be exciting.
Okay.
Okay.
Do I just stand up like this?
You do.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Great.
That's your camera.
Okay. Let me see. The poem I'm going to do for you is called Digging by Seamus Heaney. Myself buttoned up. All right. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean, rasping sound as the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father, digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills, where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug. The shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade. Just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once, I carried him milk in a bottle corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf. Digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. All right, now, folks, don't be discouraged. Owen is very, very, very good.
Stop.
And he has a masterful ability to convey that poem. And one of the things we do as judges is we look at how well did the reciting student convey the meaning of the poem. Do we feel that that person actually understands that poem? And you can see that, that Owen really does. And his use of pauses, his demeanor, his ability to use just enough gestures but not too many gestures is really important, because one of the things we're also asked to look at is the recitation overly dramatic? Or is it wooden? Is it not dramatic enough? So that's where the mentors and the coaches come in helping the students actually form their poem. So I want to ask you, Owen, how, because I know you've done Seamus Heaney 2 years in a row.
I did.
Why you chose that poem?
That specific poem, so that was the one of the ones that I did the first year I did Poetry Out Loud, which is the year that I won the state competition, and then I went to Washington, D.C., and then I made it into the top 9 in the nation, in the national finals, which was very exciting and highly stressful. So that specific poem, I picked, that was the second poem I picked. It was the first one in my lineup that I did. But it was the second poem I picked, and I picked it, partially, it was because we had read it in my 11th grade English class. We'd read over it, and then when I was sort of combing the anthology and the database for Poetry Out Loud poems, they have this big database of all the poems that you can do, that you are allowed to recite, and I found that one in there, and I was like, I could do this one. I put it in my pile of possibilities. And then when it came right down to choosing one, I partially did it because I had experience with it, and I sort of knew it, and I felt I could get a handle on it. But also, like I understood the poem. We talked about the poem in class. We discussed it.
Yes.
We dissected it. But also, and I think this is always important for me when I'm picking poems, and I think it's important for everyone when they're picking poems, everyone who gets to a certain level. It meant a lot to me personally. I was able to make a very personal connection to that piece because I'm also a writer in addition to memorizing and reciting other people's stuff. I also write, and I come from a family that isn't exactly artsy. Very supportive, of course. Very, very, very supportive. But I don't always feel that I am the same necessarily as my parents, and so
you got that sense in that poem of the difference between the narrator and his father in what they could or couldn't do with their lives.
And also, I think the other thing about that poem that's important is that really the point is the things they do aren't really that different.
Yes.
It's just a different form of the same thing. And I appreciated that message, and so I...
Because of the sense that you had of the father having a reverence for the earth, was that the connection that you saw?
Well, so because the father, in the poem, the father digs and he digs up potatoes and he gives them because they nourish his family, And he, with that thing, the pen, and I'll dig with it. The idea there is that writing is a kind of digging. It's like digging for potatoes.
All right.
You get a kind of nourishment that is just as important in writing and in poetry and in literature, like Scott was saying, that's just as important and significant as food. Obviously, food's important too, and we need food. But I think what he sort of struggles with and comes to recognize in the poem is that there's a purpose to what he is doing, and there's a meaning to what he's doing that's just as important as what his father does, and kind of translates to the same thing, just in different ways. And so that's sort of my
Now, I noticed in Poetry Out Loud, in Poetry Out Loud finals, some students chose to pick a more lighthearted poem, or maybe they balanced off a lighthearted poem with a more serious one. Was that an issue for you? Did you think about that?
I mean, I think obviously when you're sort of doing your repertoire, there are requirements in Poetry Out Loud. In terms of the poems you pick 3 poems, you pick up to 3 poems, depending on what level you get to the competition. And one of them has to be written pre-19th century. One of them has to be 25 lines or fewer. The other one could be whatever you want. And if your poem is pre-19th century and 25 lines, that fulfills both requirements, and that's fine. But the reason they do that is they want variety in the poems you're reading. And they want a different tone, different flavor. They want to know that you can read stuff in meter or in rhyme. They want to see that you can do that as easily as you could do something more
And
free
how do you
verse.
feel about that? Do you
I think
feel
that's
more
important.
comfortable in one or the other?
I don't know that I feel more comfortable in one or the other. I think they present different challenges. I think that with pre-19th century poems, like if I'm doing Keats or if I'm doing Coleridge, which are other ones that I've done, the difficulty there is making the language sound natural.
Yes.
And not like sort of stuffy, and I'm going to recite
The way
this
they
poem
read
that's because it's very archaic language.
Yes.
It's rhyme. You don't want it to sound sing-songy, and making it sound like, oh, this is just a person talking to you. You're just sort of creating a more conversational tone, which is harder to do with older language. With poems like Digging, it's a question. I think it's a little easier to deliver, but
Yes.
sometimes it's a little harder to. You have to make sure you're not making too light of the poem, I guess, or
Absolutely.
that you're not giving
That
the
you
poem
get the
its
tone
full,
just exactly right.
its full
Yeah.
meaning and its full depth.
Yeah.
And
Scott, your thought?
well, that's what's really important. I think you have to find poems that really speak to you, that you feel your voice being expressed in the poet's words. There's an anthology. This is not a competition where people are reciting their own poetry or they were just reading any poem that they find on the internet. This is a collection of poems that changes every year somewhat, and you need to find poems that really speak to you as an individual. And it helps people find their voice. It helps people be able to be more composed speaking in front of audiences, and to be able to find ways maybe that you couldn't otherwise to really let your heart get out and speak what's going on in your own life and find an outlet for your own emotions.
Yeah.
And I think Owen has done a great job of finding poems that really resonate with him. And I think that's what I would encourage. Some people try to find the longest poem in the book.
Yes.
That's not what I'd recommend.
Right.
Well,
Right.
and I mean, there is an argument in the competition. The longer poems do tend to sometimes do better. There's a very subtle subjective bias towards that sometimes. But I think if you want to get the most out of the program, and what I experience, there are a lot of people who you go to these competitions, you do it enough. You see a lot of people trying to be the poet. Like they're acting, and
Yes.
it's not, and it's
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
acting where they're pretending that they are Seamus Heaney or John Keats or Coleridge or Walt Whitman,
Right.
or talking about war.
Yes. Which
Which
we
is not-
caution as judges against. Like,
Right,
we don't want to see you act out the poem.
And this is not an
Yeah.
acting
And it's
competition.
also
Right.
and I mean a lot of and it's important to be able to perform, but I think I'm also, in addition to being a poet and doing this kind of thing, I also do theater and I do a lot of acting. And honestly, normally in acting, I think the important thing in acting is to find something in the part that you can connect to, is finding an empathy and not have it be, I'm going to put on a mask. It's more about finding a part of yourself and opening up and connecting to it so that the part becomes you. I think I found a similar process here with Poetry Out Loud. I saw a lot of people trying to make themselves into the poem.
Yes.
And make themselves into the poet. And you know, you're not Walt Whitman.
It shows.
You don't
It
know.
shows.
You don't know what war is like. You have no idea what that is like. And it was important for me that I be able to be myself when I was reciting the poem and be channeling the work of another person, but through myself, so that it was me and my life, my experience, my existence, my humanity. Because I'm all I've really got. I can't be someone else. So.
Now, I invite you, our audience, to go to the website, poetryoutloud.org. The anthology is up there. You can click on it. You can go through those poems and look at them yourself, which is actually a wonderful exercise.
There's so
and
many.
you will see when you look at the website that the goals of the program are to develop public speaking skills, to develop self-confidence amongst students, and the final goal, which I really related to, was to learn about our literary heritage. I think that's so important, and that's what that anthology does, is it really presents a wide swath of our literary heritage. And so for teachers who are thinking, well, I'm already overwhelmed and I don't have time to do this, and it's not going to fit in with anything that I'm already doing in the classroom, I would hope that that piece about our literary heritage might convince you otherwise. And I'm wondering, Scott, what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I think that's exactly why we want to do the program at Connecticut Humanities, is it helps people better understand how to read for meaning, to look at a piece of poetry and gain those skills to figure out what the author was really trying to say. And then those skills help them in unpacking the rest of the world around them, whether they're reading a poem, a novel, or just the news, to be able to really understand what's going on. And these are important skills that we need as a society today.
So I wanted to ask you one other question, Owen, and that is, I know it's vitally important to have good mentors and good coaches, and I know you have that in many places in your life. But could you just speak a little bit about who has helped you as you've developed your skills and chosen your poems and worked on your presentation skills?
My mom, number one.
Yay, moms.
That's the main. Well, no, seriously, like my mother is my best like editor, judge, whatever. I'll like when I'm looking for poems, I'm going through that anthology, which is a great way to find poetry, by the way. Like, I read all sorts of stuff that I would never have gotten exposed to otherwise. But like I can have like 10 poems. I'm like, I don't know which one to do. Help me. And I can ask her. I can perform for her, and she can give me feedback. And she's very supportive, but without like flattering me, I guess. Like she, you know, she's capable of
She tells the truth
telling
with love.
telling it like it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So she's been big. My English teacher, Denise Abercrombie, is huge.
Okay, Denise.
Because
This is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. She, you know, I originally got into the program through her class. She's the head English teacher at my school, and
I should say this is E.O. Smith.
Yes.
In
Smith.
Stores is Owen's home school, and I should also say that Owen is graduating tomorrow, Thursday, excuse me, and
2
going
days.
on to college in.
I'm going to Emerson in Boston.
So we're going to be kind of sort of losing him for a little bit, but
I'll
the
be
other thing I
around.
want to say about Owen is I first met him when we were actually reading poetry together at Poetry on the Patio, which is done up in Bishop's Corner. It will be done again this summer. And so that was my first exposure to Owen, and it was because a fellow member of my poetry group had been a judge and had seen Owen in Poetry Out Loud. So that's how he got to me.
I got that gig.
The other thing is, anytime I ask Owen to do something, he always says yes. I love those kind of people. Those are fabulous people. So I really appreciate
They're
that.
overworked people, but yes. But yes, no. But so So yeah, well, that's the other thing. Like people like Julia Paul, people like you, Johnston Nizzi.
Yes.
Oh God,
Also, great mentor.
Kate Russian, who are poets in Connecticut, who I've been able to get connected to through doing Poetry Out Loud, but who have also been very wonderful and supportive.
Yeah.
In terms of my work, they've been very big.
Can I say a
And
little bit about Kate and John, just because in
Yes,
terms of the
of
support that we
course,
give
absolutely.
classrooms. So the competition actually begins now, so if schools are interested, we have information on our website, cthumanities.org, where they can learn about the program, put their name on the mailing list. We do teacher training programs in the fall. We're going to do 2 this year, one in Manchester and one in New Haven. Teachers can come, work with John, work with Kate, work with some of our other wonderful teaching artists, poet artists, get some skills to bring back to the classroom. We've got the ability for these artists to then go into a finite number of classrooms in Connecticut, work with the students, one on a classroom level. Then the individual schools need to choose their school champions by January. And we have our state competitions happen in February and March, and we'll crown our state champion by the end of March for them to go on and compete nationally in April. And then we've got that wonderful moment where after a state champion, they can work with one of our teaching artists again and get some more skills and prep before they go on and compete on the national stage.
Now, before we conclude this episode, I just want to give Scott a moment. This is a commercial break. I want to give Scott a moment to explain what's going on with funding right now at our Connecticut level, because we have a challenge.
Well, thank you. Connecticut Humanities is the state-based affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, but for the last 20 years, we've received generous state funding as well, and we've used that to do programs all across the state, museums, libraries, other community organizations, exhibits and programs that you do and see in your towns all across the state. We help support History Day, which is another school-based competition where students are actually competing right now as we speak in DC from Connecticut, as well as Poetry Out Loud. So these state dollars, which amount to about 2/3 of our budget, help these programs to go back into the communities. And when the state budget was just passed into law, our budget dropped from $2.5 million to $800,000 when our $1.7 million with state aid was just cut out.
Ouch.
And we're at the point now where we're still in discussions with various factions in Connecticut to try to see what short-term or longer-term relief we can have. But the reality is, unless we get some money back, we won't be able to do grants come July 1st. And some of our programs like Poetry Out Loud won't be quite the same as they were last year.
Yeah. So if you go to cthumanities.org, you'll see a sample letter that you can download and send in support of funding for programs like Poetry Out Loud. And it really is important. I mean, it may seem like it's a minor add-on in terms of education, but it's really important that we make our voices heard. I don't know, I personally am willing to drive over one more pothole if we can have Poetry Out Loud. So that's my personal view.
We appreciate any letters your viewers can do. I mean, we're in communities. We're at the West Hartford Historical Society, Noah Webster House right now with a great exhibition about changing views of streetscapes in West Hartford. So we're all across the communities doing programs like Poetry Out Loud, and we need your help.
Fine. So thank you so much to Scott and to Owen. And again, please do support Poetry Out Loud and visit us again here for Poetry Around the Town. Thank you.